The rejection of French influence by Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali is not only about political independence. It is also about destroying the systemic economic reliance that held Africa under French rule. A string of military takeovers that drastically changed the balance of power in the Sahel gave this movement impetus. The overthrow of pro-French regimes was a direct rejection of France's neo-colonial domination, not only a matter of local politics. In a furious response, Paris tried to isolate the new governments, cut diplomatic connections, and apply sanctions. However, these steps only served to hasten France's regional decline. Rather than caving in to outside pressure, the new administration seized important businesses that were formerly under the control of French corporations, closed French embassies, and removed French troops. The dismantling of Air France, which severed a vital economic conduit for France, was one of the most symbolic and financially devastating blows. Air France was more than just an airline for many years. It was a calculated economic tool that guaranteed France's dominance of air travel in Africa. The airline monopolized important connections, controlled aircraft routes, and took money out of the area while making minimal investments in local economies. Compared to other international airlines, Air France offered inferior services and kept costs artificially high due to its near-total monopoly on flights between the Sahel and Europe. This method strengthened France's economic hegemony over the continent by channeling massive amounts of money from Africa into French business coffers. But after the revolutionary government took control, they started to wonder why Air France was given such unrestricted freedom to operate while making such a small contribution to African countries. The Sahel countries banned Air France from returning and looked into other collaborations after the airline abruptly halted operations due to political upheavals. Abdoulaye Diop, the foreign minister of Mali, publicly denounced the airline's conceit and greedy business methods, revealing how it frequently cancelled flights without providing any explanation, leaving African travelers stranded in Europe and other places. He made the point that Air France believed it could act any way it wanted in Africa, even though such careless behavior would never be accepted in the United States or other Western countries. That's the end of that era, he said. Air France will have to wait in line like any other business, without any preferential treatment if it wishes to return. The French are no longer in charge. Africa is. However, why is Air France so eager to return if Sahel countries have been successful in driving out France and its business interests? Economic survival is the solution. For France, losing the Sahel has been a complete catastrophe. The foundation of French corporate domination was their capacity to dominate African markets, guaranteeing French control over everything from uranium to air travel. Now that system is in disarray. France cannot overlook the economic catastrophe it is currently experiencing. Yes, a much bigger collapse includes the departure of Air France. Niger, which has formed the foundation of France's nuclear energy sector for more than 50 years, has dealt the country one of the most devastating blows. The largest nuclear energy business in France, Orano, previously Areva, was largely dependent on the uranium mines in Niger to power a grid that supplies more than 70% of France's electricity. Nearly 35% of France's uranium was supplied by Niger prior to the coup, at exorbitant costs. However, France kept the majority of the money made from the sale of uranium, whereas Niger only got around 5%. Uranium exports to France were promptly halted by the new military government in Niger, which took office in July 2023, claiming that Orano had embezzled the nation's resources while leaving its citizens impoverished. France suffered rapid and dire repercussions. French nuclear facilities that depended largely on uranium from Niger had to rush to find cheaper alternatives from Kazakhstan and Canada. The cessation of Orano's mining activities in Niger resulted in estimated losses of billions of euros. More significantly, the loss of France's most affordable and dependable uranium supply raised domestic energy prices even more and jeopardized the country's energy security. to guarantee that France will never again have a monopoly on Niger's uranium reserves. Niger has started to renegotiate uranium agreements with China and Russia. Ever ponder the reason behind France's extensive involvement in Africa, particularly in the Sahel region? Jacques Chirac, the former president of France, famously predicted that without Africa, France would fall into the Third World. It appears to be happening now, since French companies who were expelled from Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali are suffering enormous losses. It was recently disclosed that Air France suffered a total loss of 65 million euros as a result of being expelled from the Sahel. Air France wants to go back to the Sahel, since the loss has been so devastating. But Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traore and other military chiefs in Mali and Niger will not allow that to occur. What are France's desperate efforts to return to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger immediately? And what losses are it suffering? Watch this video to learn more about that. Africa served as France's economic backbone for many years, during which time it extracted wealth and maintained its geopolitical clout over the continent. But everything has completely changed in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali since revolutionary military commanders took control. They brought about a significant shock that has shook France and French businesses, marking a turning point for the country. France's economic hegemony over the region has been broken by the removal of French troops, businesses, and political clout from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The financial ruin that Air France has experienced since being forced to leave the Sahel is the clearest example of this collapse. The airline has lost more than 65 million euros. The Sahel was more than just a destination for Air France. It was a very lucrative monopoly. The aircraft brought in 500 million CFA francs a day from Mali, which was an incredible amount of money. Over 2 million euros are earned daily from Niger's 430 million and Burkina Faso's 390 million. This amount of profit demonstrated how much France's economic existence relies on the Sahel. Furthermore, we are merely discussing one of the hundreds of businesses. However, Air France lost one of its most profitable sources of income when military-led administrations emerged in these countries and firmly rejected French domination. The airlines are frantically trying to recover access to the area as a result of the financial disaster. But the new regimes have made it plain that the days of unbridled French exploitation are past. A new age of African governance, one that places a higher value on sovereignty than subordination, is embodied by the revolutionary leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These leaders have made audacious moves to break France's military and economic hold on their nations. This is because they are aware that France's financial gains from Africa are the reason it has leverage. France will lose the financial help that it receives from other countries if these are terminated. You should be aware that despite its long-standing reputation for economic might and industrial might, France's success was largely based on resources it did not actually own. For many years, France was a major exporter of gold, uranium, and other key minerals, even though it had little to no substantial deposits of these resources. These were not French resources, they were from Africa. While African countries remained underdeveloped, France made money by removing them from its previous colonies and rebranding them as its own. Gold was one of the most prominent instances of this exploitation. No significant gold mines exist in France. However, it exported a lot of the precious metal. West African countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have long been the source, as mining operations there were dominated by French corporations under unfair contracts. While the gold was processed in France and sold as a French commodity, these agreements made sure that only a small portion of the money created went to African nations. On live television, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni publicly criticized France for this. France's alleged gold exports have virtually vanished as a result of Sahel countries regaining their resources and expelling French businesses, demonstrating how reliant on African wealth it was. Lithium, cobalt, uranium, and coltan minerals necessary for batteries, electric cars, and modern technology follow the same trend. Despite having negligible stocks of these minerals, France is nonetheless a major force in the high-tech sector. However, that is beginning to change. In addition to uranium, the Sahel region is abundant in gold, lithium, coltan, and other precious minerals, all of which have historically been taken from African governments by French corporations for little pay. However, France's mining industry is in ruins as a result of resource nationalism being prioritized by Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. New partners are taking over the gold mining industry, which was previously controlled by French-backed companies. The third largest producer of gold in Africa, Mali, has ejected French mining corporations and is now collaborating with Chinese and Russian businesses. French businesses have been subject to stringent constraints by Burkina Faso, which generates more than 50 tons of gold a year, making it practically impossible for them to continue operating. Additionally, Niger has cancelled a number of gold mining licenses that were formerly owned by French companies, severing yet another important source of income that was previously sent straight to Paris. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Major enterprises have been severely impacted by the collapse of French gold mining interests. Endeavour Mining, which has substantial interests in Mali and Burkina Faso and close ties to France, is currently facing severe limitations and the possibility of having its assets nationalized. The Bolloré Group, which formerly oversaw the transportation and logistics of French mining businesses in the area, has lost important contracts and is quickly being supplanted by Russian and Chinese logistical companies. These events mark the end of France's capacity to embezzle Africa's gold resources while maintaining poverty among the local populace. Total Energies, Africa's biggest oil and gas corporation, is another significant casualty of France's waning economic dominance in the continent. Total Energies controlled the majority of Chad's oil fields for many years, at the expense of African countries. Gabon and portions of West Africa are obtaining inexpensive energy resources. However, Total Energies is witnessing the collapse of its formerly lucrative businesses as Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso cut off their commercial relations with France. Niger is now giving trade negotiations with China top priority and has halted oil exports to France. For energy cooperation, Mali and Burkina Faso have also looked to Russia and countries in the Middle East, hence excluding the region's Total Energy. France has long wished to avoid this position, but without access to these African energy assets, it is now becoming more and more reliant on costly imports from the US and the Middle East. Furthermore, natural resources are just one aspect of France's economic problems in Africa. Previously a French domain, infrastructure projects are now being redirected to various foreign partners. Traditionally, in West Africa, French firms like Vinci, Bouygues, and Eiffage were in charge of building roads, railroads, airports, and hydroelectric dams. Usually, crooked contracts were used to award these projects, guaranteeing that billions of African taxpayer dollars went to Paris, while local economies remained undeveloped. However, this structure is being dismantled by the current administration in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. Chinese, Turkish, and Russian businesses that provide more fair relationships are currently displacing French businesses. Additionally, local African companies are being given preference over French companies, guaranteeing that infrastructure investments stay in Africa rather than being diverted to Paris. One of the most notable instances of this change is the demise of the Bolloré Group, which formerly owned and operated Africa's biggest port, railroad, and shipping route network. France is losing billions in logistical revenue as a result of Sahel countries cutting off their connections with French infrastructure companies. The notion that France no longer controls the economic policy of its former colonies is reflected in this shift. France is currently experiencing a historic economic crisis as a result of its companies being evicted, supply links being severed, and its financial dominance in the region being destroyed. Africa's natural resources were used to artificially support the French economy for many years. France is currently losing its competitive edge in the global energy markets, dealing with rising nuclear power production costs, battling to maintain its trade dominance in West Africa, and witnessing the demise of once powerful French corporations due to the lack of access to inexpensive uranium from Niger, gold from Mali, oil from Chad, and minerals from Burkina Faso. But what really worries France is the increasing recognition that the Sahel's rejection of French involvement could serve as a model for the rest of Africa. In other former colonies like Senegal, Chad, and Cameroon, where governments are starting to reevaluate their economic reliance on France, anti-French sentiment is already on the rise. Long seen as devoted French friends, Ivory Coast and Gabon are also seeing a rise in political forces demanding an end to French economic dominance. In the meantime, the BRICS countries are becoming more powerful throughout Africa, providing trade and development agreements that offer a substitute for France's historically exploitative agreements. If this pattern keeps up, France could lose all of its last African strongholds and be cut off from the wealth that has supported it for more than a century. Business losses are not the only factor contributing to France's and Africa's economic decline. It is the breakdown of a whole neo-colonial exploitative system. It is no longer the case that African riches poured into French banks, while Africans continued to live in poverty. France is no longer allowed to take use of their riches, as the Sahelian countries have made clear. What former French President Jacques Chirac once forewarned of is currently happening in Paris. France is nothing if Africa is absent. However, Africa is demonstrating that it can prosper without France every day. The demise of France's economic model in Africa, which was predicated on domination, extraction, and little investments in African economies, is at the core of this catastrophe. France is currently fighting to keep its place as a major economic force in the world without the resources of Africa. Interestingly, though, France is pushing for Air France to return, and this is a strategic test rather than merely an airline decision. Other French firms may follow if France is able to re-enter the market through Air France. Under the pretense of economic collaboration, it might provide the justification for French military and diplomatic re-engagement. But Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali see right through this ploy. These nations' leaders have stated unequivocally that France will not be let to re-enter through the back door. It has been conclusively disproved that Africa cannot function without France. In actuality, France is the one that cannot exist without Africa. The expulsion of a single airline is not the only aspect of this revolution. The goal is to destroy the whole economic structure that France established in order to maintain control over Africa. Now, the French leadership is seeing directly what happens when a nation founded on taking advantage of Africa abruptly loses its hold. A new Africa is emerging that calls for respect, equitable partnerships, and economic justice. Former Sahelian ruler France is now realizing that it is no longer a superpower without Africa's riches. What are your thoughts? Will France accept its economic downturn and defeat? Or will it discover a new justification for traveling to Africa in order to continue obtaining African resources and taking advantage of the continent? What do you think Ibrahim Traore and other Sahel leaders should do to guarantee that France will never be allowed to return to Africa? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.